it sounds crazy to say that's a 4x increase in productivity. What does that do to cost per load? What does that do to effective margins potentially being more compressed as the technology is accessible to every single broker out there now to be able to rethink their pricing strategies? That really hasn't worked its way yet into the system, but I mean, the trend's only going up and to the right. It's only getting more and more digital.
Hey everyone, welcome back to This Side Up, where we dig deep into the minds of founders, builders, and operators reshaping the future of logistics and supply chain. Today I'm joined by Anthony Sutardja, CEO and co-founder of Parade, one of the most widely adopted capacity management platforms in freight. So if you've been around freight for a while, you've likely heard of them. But what you might not know is really the deep philosophy behind how they build, what they've learned working with hundreds of brokerages, and where they see the market going next. So that's exactly what we'll talk about. The evolution of Parade from its early days into what it's become really is one of the leading capacity management platforms for brokerages. Also, we'll talk about how they solve real broker problems, not focusing on flashy AI and ML and all these things, but really truly solving the key workflows that drive brokerages today. We'll also talk about Anthony's take on the future of freight tech. So whether you're building for brokers, selling into freight, or just curious about what it takes to modernize this legacy industry, this episode's packed with grounded insight from Anthony, who's been in the trenches for nearly a decade. So let's get into it.
You know, we started in this industry a decade ago and trying to build actually a freight brokerage. So 10 years ago, Uber was a new concept that was gaining a lot of traction. We thought Uber for trucking, this makes sense.
Yeah.
Turns out didn't make a lot of sense for a lot of different reasons. That's a whole podcast in itself. But we realized at the end of the day is that freight brokers, there doesn't need to be necessarily one to be replaced. It's really, they just need better tools. And so we ended up shutting down that brokerage business. That gave us a lot, though, in terms of understanding the different workflows, the challenges around carrier capacity, just around all the technologies in general and how that was not, usable or, rather not usable for the brokers to really achieve their goals. And so really found ourselves iterating on how do we help the brokers really find capacity at scale. And so fast forward a few years, there's a few iterations of what we tried to explore. We really saw this problem around truck list emails during the capacity crunch. I think this was like 18 or 19. I might have the years wrong there. Jumped into there, realizing, all right, we can help these brokers read emails from the truckers, turn that into capacity. And that was one form of capacity. And our customers were really happy with that at that point in time as that one little point solution for them to just work a little bit faster. And then how else do they manage capacity? Well, we manage capacity by going to our recurring carriers, and it's the same lane every single time. And I know my guys, and it's not really being automated. And so built some automations there. And then, how else do you find capacity? Oh, you got to go to the load boards. And so we integrated with all the major load boards out there and all these next gen load boards out there. And so over time, it became this behemoth of a capacity platform in helping the brokers manage capacity, whether it's recurring, private, open networks out there, all under one roof. And that in itself is what's really paved us to where we are today in not only being able to serve the broker for whatever their capacity needs are, but also being able to deploy AI on top of these foundations. Once you understand where the truckers are, once you're already in these workflows, how do you then help just remove some more steps using AI in our capacity workflows, and have found a lot of success in doing that, and happy to share more too as we dig in here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, so you and your co-founders, you mentioned that you started as a brokerage, right? Like, was there an aha moment as you think about the problems in that, right? Like oftentimes when we think about software in logistics supply chain in, San Francisco, which I know you're in today, like in Silicon Valley, anywhere, you really have to start with those problems, right? Like ideas are a dime a dozen, but like, what were the problems you saw early on as a brokerage that was like, I feel like we could really level up the tooling here? I mean, emails, obviously they're in that, but I'm thinking 10 years ago what the freight tech scene looked like. And I feel like it's accelerated since with, the different, VCs that have been investing in this space, the different companies doing spinoffs. But like, take us back to maybe what that beginning was like and why the pivot from kind of being a freight broker to like, hey, we're actually going to build the tools and a platform that enable, just better freight, better matching, better capacity, all those things.
Yeah. Well, part of it was just not knowing anything about the industry. And so it was just bliss, and we just jumped into it, not knowing much at all. And, we had to do a lot of things on our own. We didn't understand that we didn't even know what a TMS was. And, ended up stitching together all these different workflows to help us operate our own mini TMS at that point in time. And we didn't have a carrier network at that point in time. And so what we did was we found this list of phone numbers of every single carrier out there, checked that we could text them, and then actually built out our own little AI automation to go text every single carrier just saying, hey, we got a load on this lane. Can you cover it? And to our surprise, people started responding automatically to that. Even though they had no idea who we were. It says, all right, this is like one way of getting capacity. And so, we built all these tools to just help us find carriers because we didn't have a network back then. And really just help us execute. And as we hired, we ended up hiring some logistics coordinators from the industry that have done brokerage for a long time. They've worked off of systems like Mercury Gate and the likes of that. And then they looked at some of the stuff that we built in our workflows, like, hey, this is a different way of moving. This is actually quite effective in what we're doing for something that's not really nothing like this across the industry. And so at that point, we're like, all right, there's what is actually out there. We actually never looked. We never took a peek at under the covers of all these other freight brokers on their stacks, and really just started to see, hey, there is an opportunity here to really up level the not only this technology, but that also goes in hands with the processes as well. If I was just coming in thinking a bit different on how things should be done.
Yeah. I mean, that's good, right? Like in this day and age when it's easy to vibe code almost anything, right? You really get stuck in some of your ideas. And so when we talk with founders, it's like, have you tried to do it a different way, right? You mentioned like texting, like a tech-enabled approach that actually solves a problem. And then you say, okay, well, maybe we could automate this. Maybe we could build this into a platform and, SaaSify it, so to speak, to serve a broader market. And so I guess kudos to you in kind of that organic approach of like, well, let's solve the problem for us and let's figure out, hey, what's the next, level of this? And does the market want it? Like you kind of mentioned some of the validation and things like that, which is good. Like I guess talk more about how Parade is a little bit different, than your traditional TMS load board kind of workflows, obviously co-drivers, one key differentiator that you guys have, and things like that. But maybe talk about how you're similar or different than what else is out there in the market today.
Yeah. And so we integrate across the entire freight tech stack to orchestrate what we think is the most ideal carrier procurement workflow for the freight broker. And, to actually just unpacking that a little bit further, why carrier procurement, the cost per load on covering freight, to break it down across the entire load life cycle. You got the account management portions of it, which is, they're doing God's work and being able to get freight to begin with, to the appointment scheduling, to the carrier procurement, to track and trace visibility execution, to the billing and collecting the PODs, to just all these different tasks that have to be done. And just doing a time study across the board there, the carrier procurement, we estimate is about 35% of just all costs are concentrated there in being able to serve on a per load basis. We estimate it to be on the order of $44 per load, benefits, the employee, just be able to go move these loads. And, you unpack that further, like, all right, like what are these folks really driving towards? Their management and, the best carrier sales reps are trying to drive really strong carrier relationships, or are tasked with that. But the reality, unfortunately, is doing a lot of the mundane grunt work of a phone line that never stops ringing. And it actually doesn't stop ringing to the point where we're asking one of our customers, they realize 20% of their phone calls just don't even make it to the carrier sales floor because the lines are still busy, and then the carrier's given up. And so there's just no response back to those carriers and available capacity and available loads to be moved. And so, the just breaking that down as like a core problem, looking at cost per load as a key issue actually has some other downstream impacts of just not being able to serve carriers or find the right capacity quick enough in the existing technology process people set up today. So as we dove in and really tried to unpack, how to manage capacity on these different facets, being able to bridge those interactions and automate it across your TMS, across your interactions to the load board, across your core network. It's all one thing. And so I think, that's been hard for us to really define out there early on, where we had to talk to customers on this new concept of managing capacity through a platform that's not, we actually work with all the load boards. We integrate with every single major load board today. That's one way of interacting with capacity, but it's not the only way of managing capacity. And so we had to create those processes, build it into the application workflows for our customers, make sure that it syncs with their TMS and pull those workflows out of TMS. And, in essence, what's different about the previous workflow is that before, it's all these different manual interactions and sequences of, I'm going to check my core carriers first, and that happens to be tribal knowledge. Maybe it's stored in the TMS, maybe it's not. And then I'm trying to then go hit the carriers that might have ran this lane in the last 12 months. And unfortunately, most of those carriers, you've only worked with them once out of the last 12 months. And so, the repeatability of that carrier reuse is quite hard, actually, if there's no automated efforts to go fish them back in. And then you're going out to the load boards, which is, back to the problem I was talking about earlier of the phone lines getting blasted. Then you post it out to the load boards, and then suddenly you get a bunch of phone calls and nobody can handle it. And, the rep is just taking the first few calls before capacity's there. Capacity's loose right now. It's easy to book, but that's actually not considering all these other phone calls that they had to take just to go convert the load. And so we look at this problem holistically, and capacity management automates that entire process and orchestrates that entire process for our customers to streamline it, going from automating the recurring carriers on a certain lanes to fishing carriers back into a reusable and stronger private network, all the way to at the very bottom end of the funnel of going out to the load boards, being able to, in essence, manage that at a rate of 200 loads being covered per week per rep on the spot marketplace.
Yeah.
Which is just game changer with the tool that you mentioned that we have. Co-Driver is what's deployed to the load boards, where we're in essence having like these AI phone conversations and AI email conversations with carriers that are calling in or emailing in off the load boards, and just has become such a huge time saver for our customers to then actually shift into some of these more strategic priorities of building repeatable carriers within their network.
Yeah. I love what you said. Like solving the problem in a very specialized way for one part only goes so far, right? Like you mentioned, like it really is this ecosystem, this truly network of freight where you have, your contract, you have your, long-term stuff, but as things change, over from the standard RFP cycle or request, for proposals, and they, approve those, and go from annually to more of this like real time, maybe not load board-ish, but like somewhat, when you think about some of the procurement tools out there, being able to handle that as it becomes more pressing is really important, especially when things aren't connected, right? Like it'd be easy if everybody was on the same sort of framework when it comes to data, and everyone had their own thresholds when it comes to pricing and rate benchmarking, and a system could just match everyone up. But like you said, like Co-Driver, a big part of that is, hey, if we have hundreds, or if not thousands of companies that are interested in running freight, we kind of want to balance price with network strength, with some of these other factors. We don't just want to take 3 calls because that's all we have capacity for, and be like, well, I guess this one, we'll take a risk on. Truly get the data and then allow the company to make the best decision, knowing that a race to the bottom isn't always the best thing either, because sometimes with that comes other problems that aren't worth the savings, so to speak. So that's really cool. I guess maybe take me through, you mentioned a little bit like Co-Drivers there from and I'm not in dispatch, I'm not in any of these conversations, but very familiar with the process. But maybe take us through what it looks like, from Co-Driver to book a load. Is that similar? I kind of bucket it with, like, in my mind, some of the stuff I've seen from Happy Robot and some other companies that are, doing these AI calls and being able to accept it, but obviously doing it with a point of generation being a load board, or, a different system or something like that. Maybe can you give us a concrete example of how Co-Driver works on a load specifically?
Yeah. I mean, and stepping back a bit, the core of what we do is also in understanding the carrier profile for each one of our broker customers, really understand what lanes they move, what available trucks they have. And it's not that, the core TMS has a lot of that capability today. Capability is not the issue. It's the freshness of data is the issue.
Yeah.
Lanes change, people move, people are in different spots, network has to get rebalanced, just from the asset side. And so our job is to really make sure that we have a really keen understanding of the carrier from the broker's point of view, from what is actually a very limited set of interactions that they have with each one of these carriers. And as I mentioned, the average load to carrier ratio is probably like 1.3, 1.2. It's just not very high. And so that's only one interaction. You get to understand that carrier in a 12-month time span. And so we think a lot about how do we make sure that we keep interactions going with these carriers, so that we can store data about them and help the broker decide, so that next time that there is that RFP, they've got loaded carriers that already passed their highway RMIS, my carrier portal call requirements, so that they can use those carriers. But the issue is then, where do we start? And the best place to start is when you're already having a conversation with the carriers while transacting on transactional freight. That's the top of funnel of carriers that you don't really know. And so Co-Driver is a solution to first and foremost answer and qualify carriers calling in from the load board that are interested on a load. So carrier sees a load out there, Dallas to San Francisco, and they're interested. They email in and they just say, like, details, please. And then, 10 minutes go by, a rep might see it, and then they go in and they respond back, and there's some back and forth there. And same thing over the phone. So phone calls, you wait maybe like a minute on hold, and the rep finally gets through, and then you start dancing about the information. What we do is we've automated most of that front end of the process to save the broker the time on pre-qualification and initial negotiation with the carrier. And so, phone call or email, the workflow is rather similar. First they call in and like, wait, hold on, what's your MC number? And so they give us the MC. We go search up in the broker's carrier compliance tool, whether it's Highway, RMIS, My Carrier Portal. We'll go look that up. All right, it's good to go. Then we start revealing more information about the load details. And after that, Then we call it price action, where we get the price, we say a price, and of course then the carrier, they've got another price in mind. They're always trying to go higher, and we push back. We run 5 different negotiation strategies to go push the carrier to the most optimal outcome. And then we hand it off to a person where they actually end up clarifying the details, and then the price moves a little bit after that as well. But you can imagine this is actually a huge funnel going from top to bottom. And that's the most important part of what we've discovered around this workflow. This funnel is the time saver. So out of 100 conversations, the bottom of the funnel is the load bookings. Out of 100 conversations, only 4 conversations make it to a load booking. That's a lot of inefficiency up funnel. And each one of those conversations is a 2-3 minute conversation on phone. It's probably like a 10-15 minute async conversation on email, just because there's so much back and forth. People are doing a lot of different things. And, what if we just removed more and more from the top of the funnel? And we've got the data to show that now, where when the call starts or the email starts, 25% of those conversations are removed right out the gate, just because we didn't meet the right insurance quals. That this is not a carrier I can even work with. Don't even bring that call or email to my sales floor. And so, all right, that's 25% time savings right there, right out the gate.
Yeah.
And then there's the next 30% is actually during the load details being exchanged between the broker and carrier. They realize deployment times don't really work out. The equipment is just not the right type of equipment. I don't have tarps, and so I can't really move this shipment. So it's just clarification of information to go move the load. And so another 30% gets DQ'd right out the gate. And so you're looking at half of the conversation is just not even having to take place to begin with the broker. And then you get down to the ones that did, and did they even fit in the right price bands that we would be able to work with, or the broker would be able to work with before we hand things off. And so this funnel is just discarding so much of unnecessary conversations with carriers, and really getting to, it's a win-win for both sides, where the carrier is not having to waste their time talking about a load that they wouldn't have moved anyway. And on the flip side, the brokers getting very, very qualified carriers with high intent, good prices, already know that they can move in the right time windows, so that nobody's wasting time at the end of the day.
Today's episode of This Side Up is brought to you by Intermode, a software consultancy. Doesn't it feel like everyone in logistics is trying to figure out how to design and build great software just to stay competitive? But how do you make it happen if you don't have the right talent on your current team? Well, that's where Intermode comes in. We're the folks who help both startups and industry giants bring their tech dreams to life within logistics and supply chain. We don't just give you a strategy to follow. We execute with you by designing beautiful interfaces, building scalable design systems, and bringing Silicon Valley level engineers to build it right the first time. Whether you're a new player with a bold idea or an established company looking to modernize your systems, we've got your back. We've actually worked with some names you might recognize: Ford, Procter & Gamble, Trimble, Breakthrough, US Venture, and more, helping them tackle their biggest tech challenges. Here's the thing. No matter how big or small your project is, we're all about turning your vision into reality. Want to see what we can do for your business? Just head over to intermode.is. Intermode, making ship happen.
We talked a little bit before we hit record here, but a little bit about just using AI for automation, right? Especially in something like transactional like this, where you are coming off a load board or something where, hey, we have a need and we need to fill it. And it's less about this long-term relationship. It's more about, can you deliver on the needs we have this coming tomorrow, this coming week, et cetera. And then you hand it off, once you qualify. I guess maybe talk a little bit more about how you're thinking about leveraging AI and humans in this process, and where you see kind of that separation starting, not only for co-driver, but, as just Parade as you move into the future. Where do you think that sweet spot is today?
Yeah. And, actually, just to bring it back I'm glad you mentioned this overarching flow on transactional. Our goal is to bring these transactional carriers for our customers into relationship carriers. And, the key part is, I mentioned earlier, 4 out of the 100 conversations don't really, or make it down to a booking. The other 96 did not. Probably half of those 96 are actually still interested carriers on that load. They were interested in that lane. It was available capacity. AI doesn't forget. It's not going to forget these conversations. And so what we do is really feed it back to that carrier profile, help the broker understand that they've got these carriers that are now that data that they're collecting constantly from conversations that historically were not really recorded. Maybe the best carrier sales reps were, but the long tail is they're just too busy. There's too much to do that they're not doing the data entry to store data that might help you in the future, versus here it's default, consume everything so that we can actually help our brokers understand their carrier network, even for the carriers that they may not have worked with, but the AI has talked to at least. And so that's like one example of prepping the data so that, the carrier sales team has the assistance of access to data insights where they wouldn't have done the manual grunt work before. Now it's already done for them so that they can leverage some of those insights. And that's one way we see it. We actually call it internally the Centaur model. The in Greek mythology, you got half human and half horse, and it's called a blend of both. And this is like one way of looking at it. Like that's one pillar of it, where AI helps prep data so that they can deliver insights faster. And that's one benefit that we're seeing. A second is actually just in better, as we're looking at these conversations unfold with AI and then being handed off to a rep. We do have some customers that use AI to fully negotiate all the way end to end. On the phone, you can tell it's an AI. Like it's and is it going to negotiate as hard? We're constantly working on it to innovate there, to push it harder. What we see though is that the average negotiation from the AI by itself and the average negotiation from a person as well, both don't perform as well as AI handing it off to a rep and then negotiating a little more to then really lock in the biggest spread for a broker. And so that really just went to go. I mean, I think we saw like $39 in further push down on the price with the carrier when it was AI plus a rep negotiating versus AI alone negotiating or a rep negotiate alone. Both of them lost out to it combined. And so that really reinforces this. It's man and machine working together to drive the best outcomes and really augment some of these productivity flows for our customers. And so I think we'll see a lot of that where there's just, being very specific on certain tactical opportunities. In general, I think, you and I probably see in our daily workflows where we're just able to accomplish a lot more in our respective areas and roles. And these more specific tasks, we'll probably see more and more of that, and being able to just do a lot more with people's time.
Yeah. Have you seen, just curious, like transparently, obviously this industry is very much relationship focused, right? Shaking hands in person. We were talking about, the conference circuit before this. Have you seen any pushback on any of the AI stuff recently, or do you feel like it's in the industry, both from carriers, shippers, brokers? Anecdotally, have you seen any resistance to this, or, do you feel like the industry's on its way to just adopting it and accepting that, like, hey, there's great ways to use it if you have the right intentions, and if you don't, like, those will get weeded out just like any other bad actor, right? Like, I guess, what's your take on, the litmus test of the industry being ready for more of these automations in AI and kind of robo type assistants?
Yeah. I've got a lot of thoughts on this. I think one, it's, there's three things that I think about this. One, I think that it is about the product and how customizable the product is for the brokers' workflows and their use cases around email. Like, how does it triage and escalate? Are there certain points where you want to hand it off to a human? Is it capable of doing that? And I think as long as that capability and flexibility is there, we have found that our customers are more than willing to adopt AI quite quickly. It's actually our fastest adopting solution in the 10 years of running Parade, where at this point in time, we're doing over 7 million conversations being automated on platform. And it's just exponential in its growth rate now in adoption. I think I'll lend that to a lot of the configurability that's possible where, on the phone side, maybe it's only after it's only on the, we want our people first talking to carriers. But then, if nobody's available, hand it off to the AI. So that at least, the 20% that we're dropping off, we got somebody there, all the way to after hours configurability. And so I think the product itself governs how well it can be adopted as well.
Yeah.
And, we're seeing great uptick there. I think that, as a part two, we're starting to move into this weird world though, where there's a lot of AI phone calls out there and AI emails, and we serve the brokers exclusively. We're starting to see a lot of carriers out there with their own AI tech as well. And there's, we audit the calls every now and then to make sure the quality is there. And we're seeing AI to AI phone calls and AI to AI emails now between carrier AI and our AI on the broker side talking to each other, which seems crazy to me. Honest. And I think that will shift into over the coming years, perhaps more comfortability with trusting systems and not necessarily having the AIs communicate on our behalf over voice and email, but over APIs over the coming years. As what I think this revolution has enabled is getting people comfortable saying, like, I'm comfortable with this price. I'm comfortable having it search for loads or a truck on this lane on this day. Here are my parameters. Go figure it out. That trust wasn't there just 5 years ago. Now it is. So I think that's going to enable more comfortability for API to API type transactions rather than AIs talking to AIs.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of that MCP stuff coming out, or there was that whole protocol that was launched, agent to agent and stuff like that, where you see more. The thing that I love about, we were talking about transactional for, a broker to be able to work with a carrier for the first time and whatnot, like obviously move that into relationship. The same thing you're doing with Parade and your AI is like, well, maybe you don't want to replace people with AI day to day during business hours, but you don't have a second shift and you also don't have these folks working the weekend. Then you start to build that trust, right? Where it starts as like, okay, maybe we'll try it when we're not. And then you start to get some of the success stories and maybe some of the wins where it's like, okay, yeah, we can start to adopt this. And, a lot of times when we're building software, we think about this adoption curve, which is, if you've looked at Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm in marketing, like any broad market, like internally, every company looks that way, right? If you were to take, the top brokers and you were to list their team, you probably have a ton of early adopters, you have a ton of innovators, you have a bunch of laggards and other people that are across the chasm that would take a long time. But in this combination of AI is just this weird world where can be so dynamic, where that curve, instead of being years long, can now become, kind of squashed over a series of weeks or months, because you're being able to use it in a more flexible way versus the SaaS platforms and the products of old, very rigid, right? And so it is interesting to see how that's changing the industry.
Yeah. And, I think to bring it back around to adoption, the third pillar of why I think it's getting accelerated is you're just facing a lot of pressure right now from a macro standpoint on rates are still low, TBD on recovery. Everyone keeps saying, February of next year, but they said that February of last year and then the year before. And so maybe we're in a new normal, perhaps, where this could be what it looks like. And that then goes to what does it mean to go look internally to do what I can do now to drive efficiencies. And at the same time, the efficiencies are working,
Right.
Before it was 50 loads per week per rep on the spot market as that's the benchmark. That's where we want our people hitting. That baseline is not acceptable anymore. It is now 200. It sounds crazy to say that's a 4x increase in productivity. What does that do to cost per load? What does that do to effective margins potentially being more compressed as technology is accessible to every single broker out there now to be able to rethink their pricing strategies? That really hasn't worked its way yet into the system, but out of the $100 billion of freight brokerage freight annually out there, we are currently on our platform automating 1 billion is fully touchless on an AI standpoint. And so that's early. It's only 1%, but I mean, the trend's only going up and to the right. It's only getting more and more digital next year and the year after that. And so I think that the cost to go serve on these loads is already starting to be democratized so that everyone's able to reap those benefits. And then it becomes this more of a, well, if they're doing it, then we have to be able to get towards, whether it's through Parade or some other form of automation, be able to really invest in driving to the same level of cost per load so that they're competitive in this marketplace.
Yeah. I mean, you absolutely have to be, right? If your overhead stays the same in the world where obviously there's a balance between tech enabled software, people, that contributes to overhead. But if your overhead stays the same and your margins go down, like that's not good, or vice versa. Where do you see Parade, going from here? You mentioned on Parade, you're doing 1% of all, traffic loads, or 1 billion of the 100 billion. What do you see next? Are you doubling down into this space and just hitting the gas? Are you guys thinking about, new modules, verticals, geographies? Like what's on your mind as you think about 26 and beyond?
Yeah. Well, I think that there's just so much more to drive on digitization. And so I mentioned the 1 billion, that's out of our $7 billion of freight on platform today.
Yep.
And so there's still more to automate within even just our own, helping support our customers in their journey towards digitization. Our top customers are now at 70% digital freight. So we measure success of a touchless interaction as digital freight. It's either digitally covered or it's not.
Yeah.
What does it take to get to 100%? And so, over this next year, it's continuing, or it's probably more than the next year to get to 100%. What does it really mean to drive towards the tools, the functionalities across more of the system being tied together? I mentioned co-driver earlier, which is more on the load board side. How does that actually feed upstream where today reps still have to go into the system and then start fishing back in for the information that we gathered for them? Is there a world where we just lay it up on a silver platter for them, where we already did the outreach on a subsequent lane opportunity? We already detected the pattern on a new lane that just emerged that seems pretty recurring, not super recurring, but enough. You wouldn't, have seen it otherwise, and just put it all and package it up for the rep to go take action. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities to then orchestrate even further within the carrier procurement cycle. And so really that's the next year plus ahead of us, just really making sure that those tools are there so that our customers can build their own networks and take 70% is peak today. How do we get to 100 is the question that we're answering for tomorrow.
Yeah. What do you think? Ambitious goal. I think you can get there. I think over time with AI and adoption, there's no reason why, some of it is a little bit fuzzy in that, because it is relationship driven, I would imagine there's a little bit of relationship that maybe gets in the way of some of the touchless interaction, maybe in a good way, right? The human element, like, hey, you've done business with this person for many years and it's two founders talking to each other. It's a broker with, strong carrier network who they're just, dealing business that way. Or maybe that's more, shipper to carrier, kind of outside of the broker relationship. But I guess, what do you see, down the line? Like, do you feel like there's a part where you're serving kind of all aspects of this relationship, right? We're at brokers right now, carriers, shippers, right? Like, you're obviously interacting with them through the brokers relationships and things like that. Do you feel like there's tooling that complements it that kind of goes to, operationally support shippers and carriers? Or are you really kind of focusing in on brokers as you near term, 2, 3, 5 years?
The success of our brokers' capacity procurement is also in the success of the carriers being able to get the best rate out there and find the right load opportunities. And so we continue to think that there's a huge opportunity to innovate with our partners out there that service to carriers and helping them really optimize, really find the right loads, as there's still waste today. I think that, I think was it AI Fleet, or I think it was AI Fleet. They put out like a case study where, they've done they're a fleet out in, I think the Texas area that built out their entire tech stack. And I think their claim is that they've been able to increase capacity utilization by 50%, really understanding their driver preferences, really understanding their own network balance. And that's awesome. Like, they were really able to hone in and figure that out. You can imagine that more and more technology providers out there for the carrier specifically can really help them plan, balance their networks better, and really save on underutilized miles out there, as that's still a constant issue. And so I think anything we can do to support that, we get pretty excited to enable our partners, or even help drive that for carriers directly, to help both sides of the equation benefit.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about that mutual fit, right? Like any economy is driven by economic supply and demand, and there's some variation in that, but there's something that's mutually in the interest of both. And it's very hard to change costs. It's very hard to change expenses in some regard. And so there's usually this middle ground where, hey, this is good for everybody. Why don't we agree on this sort of, horizon? I think of some of the stuff like, fuel recovery and, versus going off DOE averages and stuff. Like, we did a ton of work with Breakthrough Fuel. That's really our foray into logistics supply chain was, that whole space on like, okay, even just this small, minute part of, not the full cost, but this variable cost, like, you can drive a lot of animosity by trying to drive too stiff of a bargain versus going off of, something that's more contractually and mutually beneficial. And, this savings, it's like, at the end of the day, if everyone trusts that, I mean, this is the hard part, right? Because you do have those bad actors, you have folks that, try to take advantage. But if everyone is out for doing something that is mutually a good fit versus trying to gouge one way or the other, we're going to end up in a good spot. We're going to create, great networks. Then you get these kind of rogue actors that will try to abuse some of that stuff. And I think over time, like, the technology is going to drive us to a more predictable center. When we think about markets, we think about procurement, we think about, all these things, that's like, it has to make sense, right? Like, or it just becomes one big business where, everything is completely entwined and there's no more, which I'm not in support of that, but anyway, all right, Anthony, thank you so much for today. Where can people stay up to date with Parade and follow you as you guys keep growing here into the future?
They can visit us online at parade.ai or shoot me an email at any time. Happy to answer any of the questions that might have spurred in this conversation at Anthony@parade.ai.
Thanks for joining us on This Side Up. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help others find us. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, feel free to reach out. And if you want to be a guest, let's connect. Until next time, keep your shipments safe, your logistics smooth, and your curiosity on the move.